We're going to start our open session meeting. It is May 17th, 2022. Present are council members Dominguez, McFerren, and Beranek. Council members Martinez and Zacarias are not with us for this portion of the meeting. So the purpose of this open session is to continue discussions about the 28E agreement and some of the thoughts and issues for council surrounding that. So I don't know, council, if you've had a chance to kind of look over, Councilmember Dominguez gave us a copy of a very recent 28E agreement that was filed with the state of Iowa from the city of Baxter in Jasper County. And just as something to go off of, because there's a lot of reasons why this is sort of an interesting 28E and something that I feel is a little bit more apples to apples when we're talking about our city versus some of the other cities that have been brought up, like Solon or Riverside. For reasons that I have stated prior, and I'm happy to state again, I do not feel that looking at the 28E agreements, while we can, I do not feel like that is the best comparison that the city of West Liberty can make, given the differences in size and budget for both of those cities. As we know, Solon has a much higher tax base than West Liberty does, and Riverside has a casino, which basically means, you know, they have money funneling into the city left and right, which is, both things West Liberty do not have. The city of Baxter is a city of about 1,100 folks in Jasper County. Their budget is smaller than ours, but again, it's a good comparison to what, it's a good place to start, like what could be done by these smaller cities when they're working with their rural folks as well. So I don't know, Dana, if you wanted to.
Sure. I just wanted us to take time to kind of go over the agreement that Lee had printed out for us. Just if you want copies of the draft 28E that we proposed. I did. And also the Pat Callahan report too. Please made copies of those. I'll take another one.
I guess my question is, why are we looking at another 2080 when we've already approved a 2080 draft?
Well, I think what would be great is considering the feedback that we've gotten over even the past 5 months, and also that we talked about concerns from the volunteers. This 28E that I have found, and let me backtrack. When I was going over the draft that we had talked about, I went online so I could compare the 2007 copy that is online, the 28E, that, the last one we had on file, so I could compare it to the draft that Lee had provided us. When I went online to the 28E list, I had saw that the most recent entry into 28E agreements was from Baxter City, dated like April 20th, 2022. So very, very recent. And because I've been looking at different 28Es for the past 5 months, I was really intrigued because this was something new that I hadn't seen. And I feel like I have a good handle on what's already been listed for and reviewed. So I went in and I reviewed it. When I saw this, the first thing I saw was that it was between a city and it was between a benefited fire district. So I went in to look over it, and there's a few things that I noticed in this one. It lays out, like most 28 AEs, the relationship. There is on number 3, lead agency on the first thing. It says the city of Baxter shall be lead agency for an agreement, clearly establishing the responsibility for employees, insurance, and associated benefits. And I noticed that. Going down, it's just very kind of straightforward, but it also on number 5 on the second page, it talks about equipment and the city housing, fire protection, other emergency equipment used in the agreement. So I thought about the difficulties that we've had trying to figure out how legally we would forfeit our property to the fire department in such short amount of time that we had. It's just not feasible. It's not. So my first thought on this was, okay, well, this gives us more time to figure out if in the future the fire department or the association, I'm going to be calling it, would want to be its own entity. This would also provide more autonomy for them, but also allow us to continue to provide those assets and things for them to utilize. Going down, let's see. It talks about the tax levies and everything else. It talks about what the city would contribute, the cost sharing formula. It really kind of lays out everything. And then it also on page, so it also provides, talks about the fire advisory board, which is the second to last paragraph on the second page here. On or before February 28th of each year, the fire advisory board shall approve the spreadsheet of calculations to determine distribution of costs for this agreement. Then it talks about the EMS chief, which would be our EMS coordinator, will be paid with funds provided by the fire advisory board. Okay, so they're overseeing basically everything that has to do with salaries or compensation. Yet if you read further on where it says fire and rescue advisory board on the next page, well, the first paragraph here talks about the city shall provide the EMS and fire advisory board an invoice for the future 6 months salary. So it really outlines everything that is responsible of the city and how they would work with the association is what I'm calling it. Right in this document, they're talking about the benefit fire district. But I would propose that the lead agency be the association, which still provides them autonomy to oversee their staff, their training, their operations, but also allows the city to have remain some ownership and the role of their equipment and their vehicles and things like that. So if you go down, it discusses in this agreement number 9, the Fire and Rescue Advisory Board. Now, remember, there was, especially when I started campaigning to run for council, a lot of times I heard the volunteers saying, well, we wanted a fire board. We want a board so we have more say, similar to what the ambulance board is, or the library board, or what have you. And when asked, well, why wasn't that done? Nobody on the city or the volunteers really understood why it wasn't, or if it could be done, right? It kind of just silence kind of took over, and that was that. Well, that's another part that I was really intrigued by this. It talks about a fire advisory board, what the permissions of the fire advisory board would be, and that also could be amended, obviously, to fit better what the agreement would be between the city and the association. But this fire advisory board is consisted of 3 city representatives, 2 being council members and 1 being an appointment by the mayor from a resident of the city of West Liberty, or the city of Baxter, actually, in this, and then 3 rural trustees. Of course, the fire department, or not the fire department, the MOU that we sought or that were given says they would want 2 city, 2 volunteers, and 2 trustees. So that's just something to consider if that would still work, even with this kind of laid out design. I think it would, but again, something to negotiate. It says the EMS chief and the fire chief shall be non-voting participants. It really lays out the board shall elect a chairperson. And when they're talking about the board, they're talking about this fire advisory board. After the selection of the chairperson and vice chairperson, a secretary will be appointed. So that happens every year. On letter C, we're on 9C now, the highlighted part, the fire chief will report to and serve at the pleasure of the fire advisory board. Okay, so that kind of is a compromise to some of the feedback that we've gotten from some of their desires, okay? The EMS chief, who would be our EMS coordinator, shall be an employee of the city. And the EMS chief can be hired or fired by the mayor with approval of council. The chairperson that they appoint each year shall be the primary point of contact for the EMS and fire chief. Okay, so they're talking about the chairperson of this fire advisory board being the primary contact, right? It says they have the authority to remove the fire chief, recommend the removal of the EMS chief, which is coordinator, for failure to perform the duties as outlined with the board. Again, that causes that separation from the city, you know, and provides more autonomy to this fire advisory board, which city representatives will also sit on, right? And rural representatives. It goes on to say what the board shall consider and advise. They consider and advise the city and the fire district, which would be the association in our case, on the annual budget for the operation of the department, which already happens, right? They sit down with the role and then they sit down with the city to talk about the budget and what they need. Any questions so far? You look like you had a comment. No?
No.
Okay. For all the major expenses, purchases, it's in the middle of the paragraph, it says the EMS and Fire Advisory Board shall be created for strictly advisory and communication purposes, shall not be responsible for the administration and operations of the fire and EMS departments. That goes to the fire chief, as it's stated further below, which is another kind of request that we've heard from the volunteers and the chief, right? The budget for the fire and rescue department, which would be the association in this case, shall be submitted to the city council of the city and the trustees of the fire district no later than February 1st, prior to the time of tax asking by the city and the fire district for ensuing the fiscal year. So it really like lays out all directions, right? Then it goes down and talks about the 911 board designee, which the mayor appoints, right? So this gives very specific directions on how to have equal representation in that aspect as well. You flip the page on number 11. Number 11 in A, it specifically talks about how the bookkeeping would be managed. It's very specific, talks about what kind of bond the bookkeeper that is hired would need to have for insurance purposes, right? What they do, they handle all bookkeeping procedures for the fire and rescue department. The bookkeeper shall establish upon their books a fire and rescue operating account, hereafter referred to operating account, and a fire and rescue capital projects account. It further agreed that the tax payments, revenues, refunds, and sales generated by the fire and rescue department shall be credited to the operating account. So again, these are things that we can work with our city administration to see if it would work. You know.
So what, sorry, Dana, so
Go
what
ahead.
that's referring to is the agency is operating as a nonprofit.
Mm-hmm.
So then that would be similar to what they have established their own account. So when they're doing fundraisers, then those dollars would still continue to be able to be managed by their bookkeeper.
Yes, exactly.
So it would there'd be no pass through for the city like there currently is. It would be.
No, there's still
Just-
be a pass through because the city is receiving the taxation for, so those taxes are received at the city.
Right.
Right, but I mean for the fundraising dollars, the fundraising dollars.
The fundraising dollars do not come to the city unless the department brings a
Gotcha.
deposit.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which is actually how it's happening now.
Right.
Nothing in this and what we do is changed.
I guess to better clarify, what is received at the city is memorial donations provided on behalf, and it's made out to the city, and it goes into their reserve account.
Right.
So,
Right.
Yep.
But the department or the volunteers actually far as I know, have their own account.
Right, yep.
As well, I would assume as the trustees would have an account as well.
Yes.
Yep.
So,
So this basically, what is very much more clear is what I'm thinking. It might be how things operate mostly right now, except for the things that I just mentioned a few minutes ago with the hiring and firing of the chief doesn't go through council. And then also, if you see on the side in the red, these are just my thoughts. Like I said, we'd have to obviously work with the volunteers and the chief and the attorneys if needed and things like that. But maybe we could amend this so we can put very clearly that if donations in respect to fire and EMS services or equipment are received at the city or through the county or the trustees, that they be documented and forwarded to the association. So it clearly states what, our responsibility is with funds and donations. Their responsibility is, the trustees' responsibility is. So nothing.
right, but I guess
Yeah.
that would depend on the donors. Because we just, if we get correct me if I'm wrong, if we get a check made out to the City of West Liberty Fire Department, it's got to go through the city. We just can't hand it over to the volunteers.
Well, that is something we need to talk about. Right now, yes, we can't just hand it over to the volunteers,
So,
but
and that's what, in the paragraph, what it's saying is that those would be things determined. So if it's funds that are made out to the city, then the city would then expense that amount. It's just a reverse role. It is a situation where those dollars are made out to the city on behalf of the department now. And the reverse role would be that if the dollars would happen to come to the city, then we receipt it and we collect it, but then we expense it out to the association.
and they would put it in their
And
account.
and then they would be accountable for it under their funds. The only thing is that it, again, is working through it, there would have to be, I just would have to know, because right now, even the nonprofit component has to be audited under the city, because it's fundraising and it's raising money to purchase equipment under city ownership.
Yep. And so another thing on my list would be to see how that would work for this association, something that the association members would also want to make sure that they understand clearly when they need to provide those reports. When do they have to audit their finances? During audit time, how would that look for us? Would it actually free up a lot of time for us? When it comes to EMS and fire expenses that have to be audited? Do we have to just say, these are the things that we received and these are the things that were sent to the association? I mean, it's all things that we consider. What I'm thinking about is saving administrative time, all of the things that Shari processes for them and that Lee has oversight on and things like that, and who would be accountable. So I think what the fire department is asking is we can operate on our own and we will take that on that accountability, right? And what I'm saying is that this, to me, seemed like it checked off the boxes of all of the things that they had concerns about, that they wanted autonomy over, right? They wanted a fire board. They didn't want the city to have to approve the chief that they elected, right? They wanted more oversight over funds, as well as the rule, wanted more oversight of the flow of money. And even if all parties don't quite understand how complex and things like that it is, even if it's pretty similar, I think a document like this really outlines, so there's no confusion on what that process is, including talking about who has to submit the 28E agreement, which in this document says, it is agreed on 13A, it is agreed that the city clerk shall promptly transmit on or before January 1st and July 1st each year all tax monies received during the 6 months immediately preceding said dates resulting from the first protection levies for the money to pay costs agreed to this agreement. Payments shall be sent to the bonded bookkeeper in charge of the fire and rescue department, as well as it says the same for the township payments. The trustees would promptly send that money to the bookkeeper, right? It also talks more about the city's equipment, or in this case, we'd have to say the cities and rules because they have part ownership of our equipment, can be provided to help support, rural emergencies. That's, I think, is a given that needs to be in any 28E agreement when you're using that for a rule. Let's see.
So you're giving all the money to them?
No, not all the money.
Well,
She's talking about, you're
It
just
says
talking.
all tax monies received.
Oh.
Well,
you're-
any tax monies levied for fire protection, which right now might be pretty complex.
We don't levy for fire, it's a problem.
Cities don't levy for fire
Nope.
protection. Is it an option?
No,
How are we doing that if it's an essential service?
it's part of our 810 limit of our general fund, which Lee has talked about. The general fund covers police, fire, park and rec, library, streets, and administration.
Okay, so how is it
And there is
working in this
no-
document
there is
with the
no-
city of Baxter, who's under the same state guidelines?
Because when they say levies, so when they're saying they're levying it, I don't know how that works because cities,
Don't have a fire levy.
we don't have a fire levy.
Okay, well, that's a question that we can ask the mayor, Katie, when we talk to Mr. DeYoung. Katie, that's another thing. Katie and I are going to be talking to the mayor of Baxter, specifically why they had to write the 28E agreement like they did. And he's been very gracious and trying to find a time that we can discuss this.
Because so here's the thing, just some talking points for them. So as you move into the fire and rescue, so currently right now under our emergency service budget, what we can levy for, because we own the equipment and the property, is the tort levy, which is insurance, which is very minimal. It was on the budget worksheet.
Okay, and
And-
that's the 17,500 that you discussed
I think
for
it's 42,000.
42,000.
But that's to cover all general fund properties. Then the other portion is your employee benefits. So if we employ, then we as a city can levy those benefits, but those would not be paid over to the association because if the city is responsible for the employees. So my next question is, if the city is responsible for the employees,
For the EMS staff is what is in this document. Mhm.
correct, if we're responsible for the EMS staff and you're looking at a taxation, then, how is the city then ensuring all that equipment, paying the employees? Because our general fund budget is not going to leave us much room to give any other dollars for service. That's where it becomes tricky.
Okay, so,
Does that make sense?
yep, and Katie, got that down?
Because just your fire budget alone
Mhm.
doesn't have employees in it,
Right,
just like you're saying here.
yep,
But because the workman's comp, the property, the auto insurance and so, and it's still saying here that the city's still responsible for carrying all of that and it's still our equipment. I'm going to make the assumption that the city is going to be responsible for fixing that equipment if it breaks down.
unless we put it in the contract that they are responsible.
So, and those are the things, because those would be tax dollars out of your general fund that's going to take away from what you're able to give them to operate. So I'm just
No,
thinking
that helps.
on the bigger picture of that. Likewise with capital projects,
Mhm.
so capital projects meaning building or purchasing the capital equipment, correct?
Mhm.
So we have reserves right now where the city out of that already gives 17,500. And so the trustees match that as well for the fire.
Okay,
And
that's
then
what-
you do 20,000 out of general fund for the ambulance.
Mhm.
So those are dollars that are already coming out of the general fund. So that's just to keep that in mind
Mhm.
from an agreement. So those are the dollars we're already working with.
Okay.
So instead of the MOU that they came up with, you've just figured out a different 28Es to still give them all the control.
I don't think this says that they have all the control. We still have the control of the money we give them.
No, we
So
don't.
How? How do
We're
they
giving
not?
them money and they're making the
provide a
decisions
service.
how to spend it.
We're giving them money to provide a service so that we have fire protection for West Liberty.
To determine how to spend it.
The agreement is that you will provide fire protection and EMS service to our city
So we're contracting with them to provide service to the city.
while they are leasing our equipment and our property, which would also have specific agreements that would need. For instance, if the association says, nope, we can insure our volunteers or something like that. These are all things that they need to work with the attorney for. So it's very detailed outline so that it shows who has responsibility for what. If they falter on their agreement, that's another thing we need to put in here, as well as the trustees would want that too, because they have ownership over equipment and vehicles. So
The 28E that goes back however long.
This one that is the one that we have in front of us, Diane.
Well, that's a draft.
That's a draft.
That's the draft.
Okay. Sorry.
This draft was approved by council
Mhm.
a year ago, a little over a year ago.
Mhm.
But doesn't matter if it's this one or the one before that or the one before that.
Mhm.
The 28E is with the rural trustees, not with the fire department.
right. So,
That's our whole issue.
Mhm.
That's where this whole mess started,
right.
is the agreement is with the rural trustees that we will provide service
Mhm.
in the rural areas.
Yes,
This sounds like we're working with the fire department,
it is, because
but that's not where the mutual 28E needs to be.
well, I beg
Our
to
fire
differ.
department,
Is ours.
is ours
Ours.
to
Can I
protect the
speak?
city of West
Can
Liberty.
can I,
The agreement
respond?
is that, so our
Yes, it
fire
is.
department will provide fire service in the rural areas that the trustees are in charge of.
and the new agreement would be that the equipment that we mutually own with the rule can be used in association with a mutual 28E agreement agreed upon with the volunteers who are also leasing our building and also leasing the equipment.
Why do our volunteers who are city employees, we'll use that term loosely,
Yeah,
why do we have to have an agreement for them to lease our equipment to fight a fire when
It's obligated upon the city to furnish that for our residents.
it's obligated upon the city
To
To-
furnish our own.
to furnish fire protection.
To the
Mhm.
city
Right.
residents.
to our city residents?
Exactly.
So why are we going to make an agree, it's like making an agreement with the water treatment plant.
To provide water to us,
You
or the
see what I
sewage
mean?
plant to
We don't
provide.
have a third-party person in any of our utilities that we
No,
work with.
No,
No.
absolutely no.
No,
They are.
we own
Yeah, we own that.
Mhm.
the
The only-
water, the
the-
sewer, the electric. The city of West Liberty owns
own-
those utilities.
Yeah.
What is happening right now is that our volunteers are having grievances against how things are operated. This is an opportunity to hear what they have been saying and also hear what we have been saying and saying, we cannot give you the property and equipment, but maybe you have shown that you can operate a fire department and they do it damn well to
Well,
provide us service still.
no doubt they do the fire.
But from an
Service.
administrative side, no.
They haven't shown
No.
us an administrative side to be able to operate.
Yeah, we, none of us argue that they don't do a wonderful job
Yeah.
responding to fires and ambulance calls.
Yeah, that's not.
None of
just-
us have ever argued that.
Well,
So
that's not
this
in
takes
dispute.
away the administrative responsibility, so they don't have to be responsible.
But
That and they can
somebody has
still-
to be.
They can still provide us fire. And
Somebody
yes,
has to be responsible.
let me ask you a question. What's a clarifying question? What specific administrative issues do you have? And this, I'm not being an asshole, like, I'm curious, like, what are the specific administrative, sorry for my language,
Oh, that we require?
yeah, no, that you're worried about, or that you think that that is not happening or not being done right, or anything like that?
Well, I mean, we just had a work session
Mhm.
at our last meeting with PCC, our billing provider.
Mhm.
One of
And,
them showed up for it.
and that can be a huge impact on how we get billed, because right now, the only thing that gets revenue is EMS costs, correct?
Correct.
Not fire.
Mhm.
And if they're not operating correctly to a certain point,
Mhm.
that is an issue. Why weren't they there?
Okay, can I
So
respond?
that they know.
Then why wouldn't we allow the association to contract with PCC themselves?
Because it's a lot of details.
If
that
they're
they
not
would
doing
have
the
to
detail
do.
now,
Yeah,
what
yeah.
makes us think that they'd do it if they had their own
Yeah,
system?
I tend to agree there, because right now, what we're doing with the fire department is working. The only thing that's not working is the volunteers, for some reason, don't think that the system is working for them, and it
It
is.
circles back around to the question. I keep asking the question. I hear what you're saying, that the volunteers have grievances about how things are being ran. But I'm not being provided any facts or any statements saying what is not being provided. What is not being done? It's just a repetitive, they're not happy, they don't like the way things are being ran.
Mhm.
But what is it that they don't like about it?
Sure. So one example is the email that we received back asking very, what I took was genuine questions to try to understand why they're confused about what we provided and what they understand. And so that's a start point. Like, if they've already been given this information, it wasn't comprehended clearly still. And I know that's frustrating as heck, probably.
But then then I'm gonna go right back to saying, then why not communicate that it's still not understood?
I think
Why
it
not?
was in the email that we received this week, that it wasn't understood, and very clear questions were asked, and it wasn't responded to.
I
So,
responded to them through the mayor.
okay,
I did.
answering the
Which I have
specific
not yet. Well, I
questions.
wanted to have this meeting first before
But
we
the
move forward.
frustrating part is when the council, when Cara and Diane are talking about administration,
Mhm.
it is, again, out of respect, the individuals are fire volunteers. They are not, they're not clerks. They don't do our jobs. I don't fight fires.
Mhm.
I respect that they have knowledge and they're trained to do that.
Mhm.
Likewise, I would hope to think that they would respect that we're trained and we have knowledge of what we're doing. From an administrative, I'll give you an example. I had an email today from the chief. There was a request for more information needed from the report from the GMT. And it was sent to me. And again, the information in there is we contract with the GMT to complete the report. And I responded with no correspondence back until the EMS coordinator came in. By then I had already done the legwork on it and contacted the company that does the reporting.
Mhm.
But those are the things, because in all fairness, that individual doesn't administrate these things. So when you hear council say they're not confident in administration, in all fairness, I'm not gonna air dirty laundry publicly, but we could go through many years of things not being provided or done correctly, and we have facts. No different than misunderstandings or things not understanding what's being communicated, but not being provided the opportunity to say, okay, we disagree, we're not right, but now I understand and let's move on, or I still don't understand and let's fix it. Just to throw your hands up in the air and say, I don't like it, and I don't want to, I just, you know. So I think that it really truly circles back around that it is a huge liability because there's really nothing concrete saying something's not right or something's wrong. And by putting it into individuals that they don't do this.
Right, but a hired qualified bookkeeper would know how to do all this.
But how are they going to afford to do that when my question is what the cost is going to have impact on the city to maintain what's still in this agreement? It is going to take away from what the city would be able to provide them as far, I mean, at best part, $17,500 a year for a reserve. And for the city lowering what we're able to collect from taxes in order to maintain that, that's the thing. It's like, I just don't want the person in a position to see them fail. And I'm talking it out loud because again, I come back to what is not working when individuals don't even listen when you're trying to communicate what needs to be fixed.
Yes, I agree. Also, the fact of the matter is, regardless of why we're in this position, whether it's whatever, misunderstanding, doesn't know all the details behind the scenes, all this stuff, there is no trust. We still need a city to operate and to provide fire staff. We still need volunteers who are highly trained and do a good job, as everybody agreed, to provide our city protection. This is pretty much my last ditch attempt. I said I found on a whim. I thought it was a sign, because it also addresses it splits EMS, which I know one of the concerns that we brought is, what about Medicaid, Medicare, right? What if they weren't a city entity? That might be a struggle, right? What about when essential service goes through and if the new association or whatever the agreement, I'm talking about the MOU, who wanted everything under them. This was another concern. Like, we don't know how essential service is gonna work. So for EMS, I'm saying. So what if that causes problems down the road that they're not tied to a local government anymore? This 28E solved that, right? So we still have oversight over the ambulance reserves, the ambulance staff. Well, I'm not sure about the reserves in how it's written here, but that's all things to consider. And I know that the chief is also thinking about that as well. The benefits of having a fire department under a city is a lot more than what they're going to be on their own. This doesn't exactly make them their own entity on their own, because they are leasing our equipment, our property, our EMS staff. They're working in collaboration with. That was my thoughts.
So currently right now, I think that your sample has some really good, examples of calculations and the fire advisory board, and it has some nice details in there with regards to that. And it's before, here's the thing, before we could even get to even having, we have something that would have to be done before you can even get to that.
Mhm.
And that's when your municipal city code doesn't have two separate departments, it's all under one.
Mhm.
You also have in the municipal code where your city is who is appointing the chief. So and Nathan, if I'm saying this wrong, so before we could even look at doing this, we would have to amend the municipal code and how we operate before we could even enter into an agreement.
If we were to draft up an agreement that also said upon acceptance of amending the municipal codes, it would just be a draft.
But the problem is you've got 3 readings on your code amendment, and you've got to pass that publicly before
First.
you can even make any type of an agreement.
Mhm.
Because that's almost like you're telling the public that you're going to pass it before your councils
Mhm.
as a whole has done the work.
Well,
Which
I'm not
there's
sure
time
if
to
you
do.
would be able to
Yeah.
have a
With that.
gap or a hiatus in the fire protection service you provide. You'd have to have an interim contract between the
Yep.
third reading whereby the change is adopted and the adoption of the 2080.
We'd have to have an interim contract.
Yeah, because you can't be without
No gaps.
Exactly. So how hard is that to have an interim contract?
that. I couldn't tell you.
Right, but it's still possible. Thank you. All right, moving on. So also in the next page, so by the way, all the question marks and lines and stuff, that's me being like, what? Because this is all city administration and the lawyers, all the tax levies and all this. This is not something that I'm an expert in. So when I have the big question marks and everything, that's what it means. Like, this is all something that other people beyond my expertise would have to look over. And as Lee just mentioned, she's got a lot of ideas, which is great because that's what we need, is to understand it a little bit better. It goes back into execution of documents, how to amend the terms of agreement, a termination agreement. I mean, it's very, very thorough, like I said. And then on the last
What, did
page,
you say termination of agreement?
Mhm.
I'm just.
number 24.
I'm just being.
Oh,
I just wanted to add a little bit.
yeah. Well, I
I'm
mean,
sure there'll be plenty of that later. but-
yeah.
Is it
It's
possible?
just taking a deep breath because, I just, again, Dina, you're putting a lot of hard work in there and I appreciate you allowing, me to provide an education from the business side of it. And I just, again, just to remind everybody that that's what you're doing, is you're just trying to bring something fresh and something for us to look at.
Exactly.
I mean, could we do something like this? Because we're West Liberty, obviously, we're not Baxter.
Right.
So, each community has their own uniqueness. Is it possible we could at least start with what we have built upon already with the draft of our 28E? And then if there's things in this other 28E agreement that you think we should look at, add them in, combine, and then we can look at a possible revision of this draft? Is that possible? Because
I think that's a great idea, but the whole, the problem is, we will have folks resigning June 3rd, and we will continue fire protection with or without them. But as a representative of also those volunteers that are resigning on June 3rd, I'm doing whatever I can to try to come to a compromise. And until I feel like, which was the other night, mind you, when I was looking up the draft and doing all this, I've exhausted everything. I don't know what else to do. I'm gonna keep trying. And what I want is for us to consider that as how you stated, Cara, but also I've heard the chief many times say, we do this as a team. Our volunteers, we vote on everything we do together. And I've had many volunteers tell me that they didn't even read the MOU. Folks who signed that paper didn't even read. And so I want to make sure that the volunteers are also in the room or understanding.
Then why did they sign it?
I don't know. You'd have to ask them. So,
Well, can I ask you, why is it so difficult to believe that we are already doing things the right way?
I'm not saying we aren't doing things the right way. I'm saying there is more than one way to do things.
Yeah, I suppose, but,
I guess my question is, it has worked for 100 and some years and we've made changes as time has gone on. Why is it?
Well, if they're not trusting us now, why do they want to have a relationship with us? As a city, why
This
do
is
they-
not something that they've agreed would even be an option.
No, I'm just
Yeah.
putting that out to you as saying, if there is no trust, then
who's to say they will work with
there's no
us?
trust, because they're still, just as I and just as they are, would still have to be working with the same. I mean, we're still gonna have the same process of how tax and budget and all of that's gonna stay the same, which was exactly what was already in here. And from taking from that, I hear what, and I think by taking what the foundation, and then maybe starting with adding a fire advisory board. And then would allow also just to keep in mind that this isn't going to be able to even be handled by June 3rd, because in order for us as a city to change how a 28 agreement or how it operates would be changing municipal code. It's going to be, and so from the administration perspective is being able to go to a 1-year term of a drafted 2080 agreement, recommendation of fire advisory board with.
The fire advisory board was already in the
Right,
draft.
right. But what Dana's saying is what she found, which is good, is because it gives the expectation. It communicates it right in here. And likewise, maybe finding in this here too, it also has a little more detail on how the trustees, the rural trustees, and how the city and so you've got a working document that's also giving you a
It's a
procedure.
guide. Yeah, it's a guide.
And if they would be willing to consider, but again, the 2080 agreement isn't with our department members, which we've covered that.
Yep.
This agreement is with the rural trustees. So
Well,
it is a document that's going to benefit the department volunteers if we can develop an agreed upon fire advisory board similar to the ambulance. If the trust isn't there now and we've provided all of the documentation and we've given everything that we can give, then none of this matters if there's no trust with the people that you're going to be working with.
right. To go off of Diane's, this has worked for 100 years. I just recently was talking to Mindy because I remember that coming up during the closed session and specifically straight out, like why just now? And the answer that I got was, well, because the fire department was accused of going over budget. And so that's when we started looking through the documents and finding discrepancies. Before 100 years, they've trusted the system. They trusted that this was going like it's supposed to go until they were told they went over budget and they didn't agree. And so they started going through all their records and seeing discrepancies and had questions. I think that if the questions would have came up 2 years ago and said, hey, what's going on? Instead of all of this, we wouldn't be
Dana,
here.
Since you brought it up, I'm
Yeah.
going to answer it. They did. I sat down with her. We went through them. We went through all of those questions.
Right.
When those questions finally came up, it was from 2018, the city couldn't go back and make adjusting entries.
Mhm.
We were already in a new fiscal year.
Right.
All we could do is say, okay, the administration part is I or Shari, nobody there is responsible for coding their bills.
Mhm.
That is their responsibility.
Yep.
But furthermore, no one told there was no communication to the fire department as a whole that they went over their budget. That is not who that conversation was held with. So that's incorrect. And the reason why I'm going to say this is because the fire chief made his performance document public.
Mhm.
In his performance document, it stated that the budget had gone over.
Mhm.
And that's the fact of the matter is when we talk about budget amendments and things being expensed before we take them through the process, that is part of that discussion from audits.
Mhm.
So thank you for letting me clarify, but again, the department, it was the individual that is in charge of overseeing the budget.
Right. And as a director of operations of my department at the university, if we're told by our, financial person that keeps all our records that we were over budget, I would have done the same thing. I would have gone to our person who keeps track of everything and said, how? Let's look through this.
But they did come to me.
No, I'm talking about their treasurer.
So their treasurer isn't going to have any knowledge over the budget because the treasurer has no activity. The nonprofit component has no connection to this. to the
Right,
budget.
right. It's, our
They're
only
two separate
connection,
things.
yeah, our only connection basically is to the leadership, the overall person that's in charge.
Mhm.
We don't control their nonprofit group, which
Right.
consists of their officers. That's on them.
And instead of bringing that document to Lee and saying, I don't understand what we're over budget,
Mhm.
he shared it with all of the volunteers and everybody he knew under the sun
On
Mhm.
social media.
on social media and every place else and said, see what the city's doing to me.
Mhm. I'm not
So-
saying,
And that, I think that's what spearheaded all of these accusations and misunderstanding.
it is a misunderstanding, absolutely. And we can't go back and fix anything. We can't go back of the horrible things that have been said about you all. We can't go back and change it.
Yeah, we
have to
understand
move
that.
forward.
We
But
are.
we
We
are and have
understand
been
that.
trying, and
But
as things continue to
that
happen.
is what caused us to get to all of this.
Mhm.
If he would have come to the city, the mayor, the council and said, I don't understand this, not just the accounting portion of it that supposedly they were over their budget,
Mhm.
but the other things that were in that.
Mhm.
And one of us or all of us would have said, it's not a legal document because procedures weren't followed.
Mhm.
It didn't go in your personnel file.
Mhm.
It wasn't worth the paper it was written on, basically,
Mhm.
but he didn't do that.
Right.
So he shared it. And then we started this, we as the city, all of us, the council, started getting blamed for everything under the sun that was wrong,
Right.
which has led us now to this pile of crap that we're dealing with.
Mhm.
Now, I go back to my first statement. The 28E that we have been trying for 2 years to work on is with the rural trustees,
Mhm.
not with the volunteers. I have a problem with the 28E that gives them, just like the MOU, that gives them everything.
Who that?
The fire department, the rural trustees, whoever the association is.
The rural trustees are not a part of the association. I asked Chief for clarification on that. The
Then
name,
why are we doing this? Because the 28E that we need
Is with the.
is
rule.
with the rural trustees.
Right, and this is a different option to create a 28E with this association.
But if the
rule
rural
can do
trustees are
with the
not part of the association, then how are we doing a 28E
With our own.
with the rural trustees?
For the service that they're providing to train.
But if
The
they're not
volunteers
part
to
of the
manage the
association,
If I
Then-
might interject, a
Please.
28E is a partnership between two or more governmental or sometimes private entities. So it has to be between, generally speaking, elected bodies. In this case, I think what Councilwoman Beranek is talking about is between the trustees and the city. Under city code, the fire department is part of the city cluster. And you can't have a 28E that it's not a 28E at all. It's simply that'd be like contracting with yourself to put your shoes on in the morning. It doesn't make sense. So I think if I understand correctly, what you're saying is that an association, whatever that is or may be, it could be an entity created by a 28E, but there would still need to be at least two participants in that 28E to create the association. So
Right.
if it's not the city and the rural trustees, then the question I think you're presenting is who is it? Who's the other entity that the 28E is being made with?
Yeah, and if any volunteer firemen want to go and create their own, they have that
Association.
ability, which they already do now, right? They have their own filed with the Secretary of State, 501, okay? That's their ball. They can take that and run with it. But what I'm not inclined to do is create more of a bureaucracy that is even more confusing by helping them form a separate agency when they already are a separate entity. That just doesn't make any
Well,
sense.
this doesn't say that we would help them form a separate agency.
Well, what they've already got the ability to do whatever they want to do.
They just don't, and they have their 504 money, their nonprofit money.
Yes, maybe
From
I
their fundraising.
misunderstand or you guys misunderstand, but they have the talent that is needed to suit up, get into the fire trucks and go put out fires.
So we're
The
supposed
city
to
does
give
not
them their
have that.
own little entity to go do that, even though they're already under the city.
This would not have the volunteers as part of the city. This would have the EMS as part of the city, but not the volunteers.
No.
The volunteers would be the people that do all the work, which is what they do now. We, as a city, after we agree on what equipment they would keep up, what finances they're responsible for, and how we get them money and how the rural get money, all we have to do is pick up the phone when we have an emergency. And if they don't fulfill
I hate to
that,
tell you, but now all we have to do is pick up the phone when we have an emergency.
right,
And if they don't
until June
respond,
3rd, unless we have a
okay,
backup plan,
until June 3rd.
which has
And
not
on
been
June-
said to me or shown to
On
me.
June 3rd, if they decide to walk, then we go with Plan B and Plan C.
I have not seen Plan C. It's
Well,
been kept from me. I have not seen
That's
Plan C.
that's because there's concern about retaliation. And don't laugh.
I am,
Don't
Diane,
laugh.
you're being ridiculous.
No, I am not. I have lived here for over
It is
40 years,
ridiculous.
and I have dealt with that retaliation.
It
I
isn't.
would not retaliate against you.
You might not, but I have dealt with that retaliation.
I'm sorry that
I
is
have
happening.
been
I did not
involved in
mean to laugh at
I
that.
have been involved in school issues where my life was threatened and my children's lives were threatened. And we have been threatened with this mess.
Mhm. It's not right.
So
That's not what I'm,
don't laugh about
I am
retaliation
sorry.
because I have seen it in this community.
I am sorry about
And
that.
I am sorry if they feel strongly enough that they hate the city enough to walk,
Mhm.
then let them walk. Because it's not the city they're letting down, it's everybody that lives out there. And we just happen to be part of it. It's the citizens they're letting down, not us as a city.
And I agree with Diane. I do agree with Diane on that, because this is by no means a difficult relationship made by us. It is.
The chief and his volunteers, his little circle of volunteers have brought all this crap down on us. And I'm tired of it. I am just fed up with it. And if they want to walk, they walk.
And instead of trying to create more of, well, see, look what they're doing. Yeah, but we are West Liberty and we're already doing it. You know, we're already following through with it. We have said that until we're blue in the face.
All the budgets in the past, when we did major cuts several years ago, major cuts to all of our departments, except the fire and ambulance. They didn't get cut.
Right.
Our other guys all took cuts in their departments and they had to put equipment on hold that we
Mhm.
should have been replacing.
And we're talking every department,
Yes.
especially Park and Rec and Library.
Police
And
department.
police
And the
too.
police department.
Well, I said every department, but I mean, those two were the bottom of the barrel.
And if they've brought a request to us, as they have in the past, if they bring a request that they need some piece of equipment, we have never turned them down.
Right.
We've
Right.
never turned them down.
The only thing we made clear is that we just have to do, the only things that have changed is that over time, the government accounting creates more laws and we have to abide by them.
Yes.
The budget amendments, you know, I can't speak for the previous clerks and how they, but when I did meet with Mindy and went through, we were going through fiscal year, 2017, 2018, 2018, 2019. There had been a transition. And at that time, I did not disagree with her, that things they were possibly coded incorrectly or not right. But I'm sitting here to tell you that I was never provided the opportunity to work out a process. And at the same time, even yet today, when trying to communicate, I haven't stopped communicating. Okay. And then when I asked them to ask me questions, because I don't know if you remember looking at our budget, but again, administration is not just looking at that department. And so having that administrative oversight is much appreciated from that end. And there are times that coding's going to become incorrectly.
That happens in every department.
But I have
Yeah.
a relationship with every one of our department heads and they contact me and they ask me questions. If it's an error, we make an adjustment. If they don't understand, then we figure it out. That has never not been an option for the chief or the entire department. So again, I have to ask the question, why go through all of this only to find that they're still going to be working with whether it's me or whoever, they're still going to have to go through the same process because it's a requirement in order to operate as a government entity. It's not something that we're making up as we go along. It's being audited on an annual basis. So
Well, I think this,
that's just my question is how even present this, which has great ideas, but how do you move forward? Because there's still years of processes. And then when we talk about the equipment, well, then that even brings up another process because can't really go into that because there would have to be somehow to decide whose equipment belongs to who, and then who are they leasing the equipment from? Because if I could see just kind of looking at this, the way things sit now, if the city's saying we have ownership over the equipment, which we're being told that's not true, and we get into an agreement with the rule and they say, no, we own this equipment. So then who are they paying the lease to? Do you see, it just gets muddier because that's been the discussion all along is that, who owns the equipment. So that would have to be decided who are you leasing the equipment from? Right? So it's not even gonna be, I guess what I'm trying to say is there's so much that can't be resolved by June 3rd. And it's not that any of you want to see those volunteers walk away, but that's gonna have to be a decision they make because your council in all compliance and all purposes can't work that fast to follow the government processes to do what needs to be done.
Yeah.
And again, I go back to what I shared with you before. You know, a year later, it's putting your city council in a situation that wasn't appreciated by the other side of this, with pressuring, wanting a decision now.
And well, not only that, not just, to me, one of the big issues here is that the target for those resignations keeps moving. It keeps shifting, because at first it was just like, let us know that you got this letter, and we won't, and then it was, and then that didn't happen.
Yeah, that's true.
And then it was enter, or it was agree to think about not the MOU, but an general difference in, our, I forget the linguistics term, but an MOU. And we were like, okay.
Yep.
And then it became, no, just kidding. You have to enter into this MOU with their counsel, who should not be their counsel, declining mediation. So essentially saying, no, we are not going to talk about this. And instead, you have to agree to all of these things. Or so to me, I guess it's very frustrating and disheartening, not only that the target keeps moving, so we don't know what to do, but also that we're being told, and I've said this before, we're being told, like, to start negotiations, we have to weaken our position in negotiations. And I'm asking everybody out there to, like, would you want to go to a negotiation? Like, I mean, when you buy a house, you don't go to the people you're buying the house from and say, I gotta tell you, this is the only house in my price range, and or like, I really, really, really want this house, right? You like step back and you're like, yeah, maybe, I'll give you an offer and I lowball it, and I'm just saying, like, that's not how negotiations are supposed to work. And so not allowing a level playing field for any of this, and I realize I'm mixing metaphors, but not allowing a level playing field for this is not.
It's not good negotiations.
It's not operating in good faith.
And when we were posed with another phrase that we needed to agree on, for forming an agreement with that has equal authority, right? That also we didn't agree on, because we own a lot of property and equipment and things like that we literally cannot agree to give equal share to, especially not in a few weeks, right? That was on my mind. We cannot do this. Like, these volunteers will have to quit unless we can provide something else to where they're like, okay, that's worth hanging out for, but we need an agreement that they're going to stick around. We can't just say, all right, you're giving us another week. Let's work our butts off all week to make sure, and then
They don't,
Yeah.
they
We
don't
can't-
have
we-
to
We
quit.
can't get it done. Doesn't matter what we agree to at this point. I mean, their MOU or this Baxter one or whatever. It doesn't matter. We can't get it done by June 3rd. Like Lee was explaining. We have ordinances that we have to consider changing first.
right.
Which I don't
before-
believe that the legal minds in this discussion understand.
Right. So, and like Lee said, it takes 3 readings. So we don't even have the draft yet on the new ordinances. And even if the city manager busted his butt and did everything he needed to do to have a draft to us by June 3rd, that'd only be a draft. Then it would be 3 more meetings
Yep, to change it.
to change it. So then you're into 1st of August. I mean, that's at a minimum.
But you're not gonna go changing your ordinances unless you're agreeing that you're gonna
Yeah.
change the concept.
Right.
So I mean, the concept is really, has to be agreed upon first, that you're even willing to entertain the notion of going into an agreement with a 2080 agency.
And I,
Then you would change your code.
Yeah.
You're not gonna change your code if you're not willing to enter into that sort of an agreement.
No.
I guess in the bigger picture too, I mean, let's go all the way back around, because moving forward has a foundation of working relationships. So from city administration, from my perspective, is in order to build a foundation to move forward, however this looks, I strongly believe we have to work on the relationship and resolve how the relationship is going to work before you can lay a foundation to move forward. Because the relationship, when you talk about trust and we talk about retaliation, as an individual it's been publicly stated that I've stole money from the city. That's a very big accusation. And publicly, the audits have found that's unfounded. And the accusations that have been made, I would like to have an opportunity to either build that relationship, because again, there's an expectation by our council that it doesn't matter whether we like who we're working with, we're going to have to work and we're going to have to build a relationship of that trust. So how do you move forward in agreement if you don't have that foundation? Does that make sense? I mean,
I hear you, Lee, and I don't mean to cut you
No, no,
off.
no.
It's 7:21. Yes, I would like to give everybody a chance to have a break. I want to make one final statement on this, is my fear. Well, I'll save it for the meeting. Never mind. Let's break unless anybody has a final thing to add.
I just want us, again, I want to be respectful of Councilmember Dominguez, because she's working very hard and she's working hard to find that balance and find the right answer. And I respect what you presented before us for us to go through, and I, as a city clerk and part of the administration, I do see that there are some pieces there that are workable. So thank you for that work and putting that forward for us.
Yes, and I would like the chief and the volunteers to be able to read that.
Yeah, we can talk about that at the meeting. Make sure it's not a private.